When it comes to contributing planning data, now more so than ever in this world of big data we're in, we are being asked to contribute large quantities of data. And we can obviously go through and type into all of our cells individually, but that's not the quickest way to do things. So quite often we might have worked things out offline in maybe Excel or a similar tool, and we can always copy and paste those values in here, which speeds things up a lot. But IBM have also introduced this concept of data spreading, which is designed as a way to enter data a little bit quicker and perhaps a little bit more intelligently. So what I can do is if I click in an individual cell and right click, I have this spread data option available. Now when I click on that, it tells me what sorts of spreading that I can do. So I can just repeat an individual value in whatever direction I want. I can clear cells if they already contain data. I can start changing the percentage that's in a cell, things like that. But we see some of them are also grayed out, and they're grayed out because of how I selected the cell. So in this case, when I was in an individual cell, it just gives me the top 5 options. Whereas if I instead had selected a range of cells as a starting point, then I still get those 5, but I also get straight line and growth percent, which are things that you do apply to a range of cells. So you have a starting value and an end value, and then it increments all of the cells in between. And the final option we have is I can instead click on a consolidated cell, and then we get the additional ability to change the underlying values. So in this case, where my consolidation is a year, I can repeat a value to the leaves underneath it, or I can provide the high level value and tell it to just spread equally to the leaves. But we also have these relative techniques underneath. And one I want to focus on is the relative proportional spreading, as I find it's a very useful one. And in that case, what we often do when we're starting a plan, we might take last year's values as our starting point, but maybe in this case we've got a new store, something that doesn't have any actuals for the previous year to use as a base. So I can instead select one of the other store's data to use as my starting point. So I want to take this first store here because I believe it has a similar seasonality and spread. And then it tells me what the value is for that other store. So I could obviously select the same value, or I can select a different value and apply. And then it will take the new value I have told it to put in here, but it spreads it in the same way the other store that we chose as our comparison has its data. So quite a useful way for doing new stores, new products, or something like that. And what we will do, if we click on one of the individual cells and go to that repeat option, so this is the most common thing that we see in terms of data spreading. So we want the same value applied in multiple places. So if I just put 1,000 here, now by default, I've only got one cell selected. So if I clicked apply now, it just updates that one cell. And obviously going through right click, it's a lot slower than just typing the value in. But our options in here, so the option that we will pretty much always have is whether we want to replace the value. So if that is selected, the value that I am telling it to apply is the one that will end up in the cell. But I can also use add or subtract. And in that case, it will make my change on top of the data that is already in the cell. So it can be useful if you already have a baseline, but perhaps you want to take 1,000 off each month. And then we have this direction drop down that we can push. And in there, we can say, because I started with an individual cell, this is for choosing what range I want to apply it to. So I can just take all the cells to the right, or I could go down, or I could do a combination of both, right and down. Obviously, we also have left and up to cover all the directions. Now, what you should focus on here is this little section up the top as well. So when I make my changes, we see that that changes. And that is the shortcut command that we can use instead of going through this right click menu. So in this case, we just have R greater than and 1,000. So the greater than refers to the right direction. So if I click apply, we see our 1000 goes across, but I could just use that shortcut to do the same thing instead. And repeat specifically stands out a little bit because it is the most commonly used spreading technique. So it is also our default. So the other spreading techniques, we do need to use the shorthand that will show up for them. But for repeat, we can skip that bit and just jump to the direction and the value. And then it knows that we want to use repeat as our default. So one of the other things we can do, so in this example, we already have a baseline in our month. So we have 1000 in each month, which is 12,000 as a total. But what I'm going to do is say, actually, I want my total to be 15,000. But I know that I want to keep what we have in some of these individual months because I'm quite happy with the 1000 that's selected there. So I can also right click and we have this hold option, which when we tick, we see we get this little sort of pause symbol in those cells. Now, if I type 15,000 at the consolidated level, what that will do is it tries to proportionally spread the new value to the data that was underneath it in the months, but it's done that while knowing that I wanted to hold the 1000 in these 4 months. So it instead takes the difference and applies it over the other cells. Now, what we should always do after we've sort of done that holding technique is we see it still has the pause symbols. So you also want to release the holds. So you can do it on an individual cell by right clicking and release hold, or you can right click anywhere and select release all holds, and then that will remove all of them. But what we can do instead of what we did before, we can sort of do the opposite of that. So you could also hold a consolidation. And then if you change one of the individual cells underneath it, it puts the cell that you changed to the value that you typed in, but the remaining cells around it, it proportionally changes those in order to hold at the total level that you told it to. And last but not least, another data spreading technique that we have available to us is just using letters. So we have the K or the M available to us. The K provides 1000 and the M provides 1,000,000. So you can save yourself a few milliseconds by not having to type quite so many zeros in. But the spreading techniques can be very useful to getting your data in a little bit quicker, and particularly with things like the relative proportional spreading and the holding techniques, you can definitely work in a more intelligent way. So it's certainly something to get used to. And what I would suggest is not all of the techniques are something you'll use on a regular basis. Some you might never find a purpose for at all. But start off by using the right-click menu, and it'll be a little bit slower while you're getting started. But while you're doing this, just keep an eye on the shortcut that it produces automatically. And as you start to remember that, you can work with that instead and just type it straight into your cells. And then all of a sudden you will be working in a much quicker, more efficient way.